I am Ashok Kumar Sharma, the chairman of People Welfare Foundation and the director of AK Study Center. I would like to discuss about an story, The Portrait of a Lady. The Portrait of a Lady is written by Khushwant Singh, and Khushwant Singh belongs to Punjab. About the childhood period of the Khushwant Singh and a nostalgic matter, that is the also association of his grandmother. What is the story? Why is this story? And this story is so much important. So why is the so much important of this story? Because the relationship between Khushwant Singh, the author Khushwant Singh, and his grandmother during the time of his childhood, means that period of the childhood of Khushwant Singh. What happens once Khushwant Singh and his family, Khushwant Singh and his parents along with his grandmother had to live in village in Punjab. But after some time, Khushwant Singh's parents had to settle down in town to do the economic condition better, and there was meanwhile that time Khushwant Singh's parent had to live in town to continue and to wait till the prosperity of their economic condition. Until that time, and meanwhile in the period of that time, Khushwant Singh's parent said Khushwant Singh's grandmother to look after Khushwant Singh. And when was Khushwant Singh? Why is this story important? Because affection between the Khushwant Singh and his grandmother. When Khushwant Singh was child, he used to go to school. That times his grandmother had to look after to Khushwant Singh. Like in the morning, his grandmother used to wake up Khushwant Singh, and again his grandmother made him prepare for bathing and going for school. Used to make chapatis, crumbs of the chapatis, and also accompanied and commingled all the stationaries of education, ink pots and other writing instruments. After making Khushwant Singh ready, Khushwant Singh, also his grandmother used to accompany till the school of Khushwant Singh. And meanwhile of the time of the class of the Khushwant Singh, his grandmother used to pass her time inside of the temple, praying the beads of the rosary and also reciting the holy inscriptions. Khushwant Singh had to departure from his school. Then just nearby the school, there were many dogs were waiting for the crumbs of the chapatis thrown by his grandmother. And after feeding the crumbs of the chapati to those dogs, they had to return to the home. And the same process went on for a long time. But after passing long time, Khushwant Singh's parents called them, means Khushwant Singh and his grandmother called them to the town's house. But when they shifted, Khushwant Singh and his grandmother shifted to the town house, then a change happened. Khushwant Singh had been admitted in an English school, and that times Khushwant Singh had to go by bus. So his grandmother did not accompany him on foot, because there was not a temple nearby the school or in temple nearby that place. So maximum of the time his grandmother had to pass the time inside of the home. How? His grandmother used to pass her time inside of the home while walking on the yard of the house, praying the beads of the rosary and also spinning the wheels. And in the meanwhile of the afternoon time, she used to feed, or she used to throw the crumbs of the chapatis to the sparrows. And many sparrows used to come in the yard of Khushwant Singh. And like of this times had been passed. And the second interesting event happens when Khushwant Singh went to the university for higher education in the town. That times one nostalgic thing happened that Khushwant Singh had been given a separate room to live and to study, because his grandmother had to live most of the time alone, because it was the demarcation of the serenity, and his grandmother accepted this serenity with resignation, right? And time went on, and after completing the education in the town, Khushwant Singh had to take the decision to go abroad for higher education for foreign country. And Khushwant Singh knew that it will be something annoying or very sad news to his emotionally sad news to his grandmother. But what happened? Their parent had taken the decision, make Khushwant Singh go abroad for higher education. And one day Khushwant Singh was to departure in the railway station for foreign country. Then his grandmother went there to accompany and see of him. Last time at the railway station, his grandmother kissed as a last symbol of the affection. And that times Khushwant Singh realized that perhaps it may be last symbol and the last memory of his life, because Khushwant Singh knew that they had to go for higher education for 5 years, and for this so much long 5 years of duration of the times, that times Khushwant Singh realized that perhaps it may be last symbol and the last memory of his life, because Khushwant Singh knew that they had to go for higher education for 5 years, because Khushwant Singh knew her for 20 years already, that he used to see for 20 years as the same age, although she was very much old, about 90 or 100 years. For this so much long time, it was very difficult to survive. Means Khushwant Singh pondered that after in this meantime it may be that my grandmother would die, because Khushwant Singh knew for 20 years already that he used to see for 20 years as the same age, although she was very much old, about 90 or 100 years. And Khushwant Singh used to see his grandmother as the same age. But many person used to say to Khushwant Singh, and Khushwant Singh used to listen about his grandmother, that during the time of the youngness of his grandmother, she was very pretty, and she was very much pretty, and she was very much beautiful, and she had a husband. Khushwant Singh departed for higher education for foreign country. But what happens after also time passed, 5 years time passed, and Khushwant Singh returned after studying from abroad to his hometown, Punjab. What happens? Then also his grandmother went to railway station for reception along with his parents. When the Khushwant Singh came, his grandmother clasped him, so he could understand the love and the sympathy of. Okay, then what happens in the next times, because Khushwant Singh's grandmother was so much happy and so much excited, because his grandson Khushwant Singh returned from abroad, from foreign countries after completing his education. So next day, what happens? In the meanwhile, Khushwant Singh had never seen his grandmother living for praying the beads of the rosary. In the next day, actually his grandmother left praying for the beads of the rosary, and instead of this, his grandmother accompanied and called her neighbor women, and also taken the singing drums, and his grandmother started to thump so much drum, and there was very tense environment it was looking according to the Khushwant Singh. Khushwant Singh realized that, and Khushwant Singh told his grandmother to stop, because it is enough. And what happens in the next day, because she fell too ill, and the doctor came and told The doctor came and told to their parents and in the home that don't matter, it is not matter of worrying because it is just a fever and this fever will come down after some time. But what happens? Which was to be happen, which happened. That while meanwhile during the time of the while going the time of the afternoon, she died while praying the beads of the rosary, and the rosary beads of the rosary fell down from the hands of his grandmother. It was very morning time, very calm situation, very sad episode of the life of all of them, all of that family. Then actually truth is truth, and his family had to accept that. Then they brought out the corpse of his grandmother from the house to the yard, and this and they surrounded it, and they surrounded it with red cloth. What happens also the same times, the same day, in the time of the afternoon, just as earlier, and thousands of sparrows came and sat down around of that grandmother, but no of them chirruped. As earlier, those sparrows used to chirrup. Also, those sparrows were mum and silent and were very much sad, and used to feel the sadness along with their family. Then after watching also the condition of these birds, sparrows, Khushwant Singh's mother also threw or gave of the chapatis as earlier his grandmother used to give them. But a very interesting event that no of them sparrows gave any attention towards the crumbs of the chapatis, and all of them were looking very much sad. Then what happens after this morning and this event, all of those sparrows went away from there, and the next day sweeper swept the crumbs of the chapatis. So what is the story and what is the message of this story? This is the story of the portrait of a lady written by Khushwant Singh. Okay, so there are few questions maybe come in the examination. That first of all, that question may be asked that how many states are there which are changing states. There are many questions may come that what are those states, those are changing states. There are three stages of the life of the Khushwant Singh. There are resembling something changes. First stage of the childhood, when the Khushwant Singh used to study in the school of his village, in rural village. Second, when they arrived to the town. And third, when Khushwant Singh went to the university and Khushwant Singh had been given a separate room. So these are three stages of the life of Khushwant Singh. And also one question may be asked that what are those points by which you can say that his grandmother was a religious person or was a religious personality. Definitely, when we just sum up the points of this story, then we can come to conclude that. Just like we see in village, his grandmother used to go with him, and when he accompanied, because when her grandson used to study inside of the school, that times in the meanwhile of that time, she used to pass her time inside of the temple and praying the beads of the rosary, and also reciting the holy inscriptions first, and also she used to feed the crumbs of the chapatis to the dogs. So it is also one of the kind of very holiness and very generous personalities introduction. Okay, and in the second stanza and the second times what is seen here, that when his grandmother shifted to the town, there was no a temple, and also she used to pass her time feeding the sparrows crumbs of the chapatis. So it is also the symbol of the generosity and a holy hearted person and holy person. So these are some ethical values which resembles in the personality of his grandmother as a holy or as a religious personality, or holy or as a religious women. Value based questions may become, like a question may be asked to you that do you have any example resembling to this to your life. So you can give any example pertaining to your life It may be pertaining to your grandmother and pertaining to your grandfather. Many questions also and important words that you have to mug up it in your mind. These are a few words that you have to mug up to your mind, just like rosary, beads, serenity, seclusion, vedal, pedal, haggle, regal, etc. Thank you very much being with us. Still you did not subscribe our YouTube channel. Please subscribe our YouTube channel to get these types of the video and pertaining to different kinds of subjects and different kinds of topics. And also please share channel link to other students so that also other students can benefit. Thank you very much being with us. I am Ashok Kumar Sharma, the chairman of People Welfare Foundation and the director of AK Study Center. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.